All right, let's dive in. Today we are cackling one of the biggest, most foundational ideas in all of Christian theology, the Trinity. And we're going to explore a really fascinating analysis that asks a pretty bold question. Does the Bible itself actually teach this doctrine? Let's get into it. The source we're digging into today kicks things off with this really powerful idea. It says that if we want to get to the bottom of this, we have to perform a kind of theological surgery. We have to try, just for a moment, to set aside all the creeds and traditions that have acted like a lens, coloring how we've seen these texts for centuries. And that, right there, is the central question for our whole explainer. If we can take off that lens and approach the text with fresh eyes, as if we're reading it for the very first time, does it naturally lead us to the doctrine of one God in three co-equal persons? That's the investigation we're about to jump into. Now, to help us out, the source gives us a really critical framework. It says any doctrine has one of three relationships with the text. It can be mentioned in passing, it can be assembled by later readers who are kind of connecting the dots, or it can be actively taught by the biblical authors themselves. And the argument here is that for a doctrine to have real, solid scriptural authority, it has to hit that highest bar. It has to be taught. So, with that framework locked in, our investigation can officially begin. We're essentially putting this famous doctrine on trial, and we're using the Bible itself as the primary evidence. So, where do we start? Well, the most logical place is to look for the most direct evidence. Where do the biblical writers themselves give us their clearest, most explicit definitions of the one God? Our first piece of evidence comes from Jesus' own mouth, and you've got to notice the way he phrases this. He's talking to the Father, calling him the only true God. And then he refers to himself as the one who was sent by that God. The source argues this language creates a very clear distinction right from the start. And it's not a one-off. Check out what the Apostle Paul does here. The structure is so deliberate. He assigns the title One God specifically to the Father, and then he assigns the title One Lord specifically to Jesus Christ. According to the author, this isn't just casual phrasing. It's a precise theological statement that puts them in distinct categories. So, here's the first big takeaway. When you look at the most definitional statements in the New Testament, the author argues they consistently follow this two-term pattern. One God is the Father. One Lord is Jesus. And this distinction, the source claims, is really our ground zero for understanding the biblical model. Okay, now for clue number 2. The source makes the point that to really get what the apostles were writing, we have to kind of time travel. We have to understand the intellectual world they were living in, a world that was already buzzing with certain ideas long before they came along. And one of the biggest ideas in that world was the concept of the Logos. You see, before the Gospel of John was ever written, Jewish thinkers like Philo of Alexandria were already talking about the Logos. They saw it as God's word or reason, a divine go-between, connecting the totally transcendent God with our physical universe. And this is where it gets really, really interesting. Look at the language. The titles used for Jesus in the New Testament, firstborn, image of God, the one who created everything, they map almost perfectly onto the existing job description for the Logos. The argument is that the apostles were deliberately plugging Jesus into this familiar, powerful concept. But, and this is the absolute key here, in that original context, being the Logos did not mean you were co-equal with the supreme God. No way. It meant you were derived from him, and therefore you were subordinate to him. The Logos wasn't self-existent. Its divinity was a gift from the one supreme God. This leads us right to our third and final clue, and this one comes to us from the world of ancient law. It's all about what it means to be an agent for someone else. The principle is called shaliach, and in Jewish law, it was a huge deal. An official agent, a shaliach, didn't just have some of the sender's authority, they had all of it. For all legal purposes, seeing the agent was the same as seeing the sender. Their authority was identical. Now, with that legal principle in your back pocket, a famous line like this from Jesus suddenly clicks into place a little differently, doesn't it? The source argues this isn't a claim of being the exact same being, it's a claim of being the perfect agent. To see him is to see the Father represented perfectly, acting with the Father's full and complete authority. Okay, so let's recap. We have our clues, the Bible's own definitions, the idea of the Logos, and this legal principle of the shaliach. So how does the source put all these pieces together to build a different model? The author gives it this, admittedly very long name, Monarchian Shaliach Subordinationism. I know, it's a mouthful, but each word means something. Monarchian means the Father alone is the supreme ruler. Shaliach means the Son is his perfect agent. And subordinationism means the Son, while totally divine, gets his being from and is subordinate to the Father. And here you can see the two models side by side. The traditional Nicene model, on the one hand, is all about shared essence and co-equality. But this other model emphasizes a difference in origin, a clear hierarchy. Remember, the Father is greater, and a structure of one supreme God with his supreme agent. Okay, this brings us to the final and maybe the most crucial part of this whole analysis. What is the status of the doctrine of the Trinity? Is it a non-negotiable, revealed truth, or is it something else? And to answer that, the author introduces one last really important distinction, the difference between a dogma and a theologimenon. A dogma is a truth that's divinely revealed. The church just receives it. But a theologimenon is a human-constructed theory that is assembled from all the data. One is revealed, the other is deduced. So, the author's whole case kind of comes down to this. Why argue that the Trinity falls into the category of a sophisticated theory rather than a divinely revealed dogma? Well, the source gives us 4 main reasons. First, the technical language used to define the Trinity, words like homoousios, which means same essence, it's just not in the Bible. Second, you never have a biblical author stop and explain, okay, so here's how the 3-in-1 God works. There's just silence on that front. Third, the earliest Christians didn't need to believe in this exact formula to be considered believers. And finally, the doctrine was officially hammered out centuries later, and it happened in a process that, frankly, involved a lot of politics and imperial pressure. So the author's final conclusion is basically this. The traditional doctrine of the Trinity is a powerful, venerable, and historically massive theological model, no question. But it is a model that was assembled. It was built using philosophical tools that came after the Bible was written, in order to solve arguments that came up long after the apostles were gone. And that leaves us with a question that goes way beyond just this one topic. It's a challenge at the heart of all interpretation. For any foundational belief we hold, how do we draw that incredibly fine line between what a text is explicitly teaching and what has been skillfully and maybe even beautifully assembled from it over the centuries?